What's up everyone, Shirley here, and welcome to my Midnight Beta Arms Warrior Ramble thing. We're just going to talk about the class and spec overall today, going over the recent changes, just some thoughts, feedback, a lot of talking. I'll have a rotation kind of guide thing towards the end of the video, so I'll have that timestamp down below if you're just looking for, a spec and how to play it for the beta. That'll be towards the end of the video, but jumping right in here, I just want to talk about some changes and stuff about the class. First things first, this is our tier set bonus. The 2 set is just increasing the damage of Mortal Strike and Cleave and Colossus Smash's debuff, and then the 4 set is extending Colossus Smash by 1 second for Mortal Strikes and Cleave hits on 3 targets. Doesn't change the rotation drastically in single target, but in AoE it definitely impacts it, so it's alright. I don't have too many complaints with it. And then going over talent changes, especially the beta build this week, what changed? A lot of the talent nodes in the warrior side of the tree got shuffled around, and then as far as the arms changes, the massive one is our Apex talent. Master of Warfare got changed. Overpower no longer procs Heroic Strike. It's all single target melee abilities have a chance to proc it. It seems like it doesn't proc quite as much as it did prior to the change. However, overall, I would call this a positive change. I like this much better than just overpower procking it. It really cleans up the rotation, especially the execute phase. So big fan of that. Going over just some basic things in the warrior side of the tree. You can pick up Rend and Thunderclap now at the same time. Well, you could always do this, obviously, but there's not much of a reason to take Thunderclap in most situations unless you were chain pulling, and you could put, double the bleeds up on moving targets because they both have a cooldown. Rend, anyway, now has one. Other than that, we've got some nice utility stuff that's came. Wrecking Throw is still here, of course. We've got 2 new shouts here, or kinda, not 2 new shouts, but Zerker Shout is available, as a PvE utility now. This is nice. Fearless is a new passive. I really like the removing of movement impairing effects. This is nice. We still got Intimidating Shout, of course, and Piercing Howl, but Piercing Howl now has a little sprint attached to it. Really nice. Honed Reflexes got buffs, so it actually feels worthwhile to take. And then the lower half of the tree here is what I kind of want to talk about, things I got a problem with. We've got all these required nodes, and there's a lot of required damage nodes, all these passives are really good. And then we've got some shuffling of things and changes that I, don't like. Speaking of which, Javelineer got changed. It's buffing these things. It's giving us another utility Silence. That's all good and all. I don't like where it's at on the tree at the moment because it's basically required. When we can't really pick up Resonant Voice, and your raid leader's really going to want this to buff Rallying Cry and stuff. But speaking of Rallying Cry, Battlefield Commander is basically required. You're going to have to take this for the Battle Shout buff, the Rally buff, etc. And then we've got this new talent called Stance Mastery, which is buffing our critical strike damage. And this is going to be like a big math question, but basically we don't have enough points to grab everything we want. So you're forced between Stance Mastery and Barbaric Training at the moment. Barbaric Training buffing Slam and Heroic Strike, because Heroic Strike's impacted by all those modifiers, is pretty big, because Heroic Strike is doing a ton of damage, per hit, not overall. But Crushing Force you're always going to take. And Anger Management impacting Colossus Smash and Avatar now just seems required as well. So this is, fine on paper, but there's a really big, degenerate gameplay thing that's going to happen here, where if you have multiple warriors in your raid group, well, only one of you really needs this talent. So suddenly, if you've got 2 of them, you can force the tank or whatever to take Battlefield Commander, and then suddenly the DPS warriors can go into Stance Mastery. And it's just unnecessary friction, I think, that'll pop up in the player base to do this. Just because, from a pure DPS point of view, as long as one warrior's got that Battle Shout buff, we can grab this. So I don't like that. I think they could fix this easily if they just swap Javelineer and Barbaric Training's position. That way you only have to take one of these nodes. You could drop that and then you can grab both of these. They did the same thing 2 beta patches ago where, you were missing a talent point essentially. So I want to see that changed. And then Champion Spear is kind of our de facto cooldown that replaces Thunderous Roar. It does all right damage as a DPS cooldown. It's just, I don't think it's ever going to replace all of these passives. It's more of a utility spell for Mythic Plus or PvP. So it's got its place, but I don't think you're going to take it most of the time for raiding, not for damage anyway. That's pretty much it as far as the warrior side I wanted to look at. The arm side of the tree here, we're looking at a single target Slayer build first. I'm going to kind of just talk through all of the specs before I, go over each rotation and everything individually. So the Slayer side feels really smooth, actually. I like the way that Slayer plays right now in single target and AoE, actually. Not a ton of complaints or anything. The only thing that's kind of messy right now is, like, they got rid of, a ton of buffs and procs and stuff from the War Within, but you're still kind of forced to plate spin, so to speak. So you've got Executioner's Precision is still here. Martial Prowess has been redesigned, like the overpower buff that it used to be, but it's still here. It's not nearly as impactful, so you can kind of ignore it in a way, but it still exists, so if you're trying to really min-max, you're going to want to pay attention to this. And then you also have Heroic Strike procs to mix into this whole equation. So the execute phase is a lot better than it was, since this can proc off of anything, but it's still a bit messy as far as priority goes, especially for a new player. Like, you're going to get all of these whack-a-mole light-up, things. You're not going to know what to press. So I think a lot of it could be solved if... This is probably asking for too much, but I think Heroic Strike being back off of global cooldown when it procs would be huge. Like, just a massive quality of life benefit. That way you don't got to pick and choose between it, a double stacked Executioner's Precision Moral Strike, or, if you have 2 or 3 stacks of Martial Prowess, etc. during the execute phase. Like I said, I would like it back that way, and it would add a bit more flavor to Heroic Strike as well. It'd just be fun. But outside of that, Heroic Strike does feel nice to press. I like Slam turning into a proc again like we had at the end of BFA. It's just a fun button to press. So no complaints about it itself, I suppose. Armor Pen being back is a nice flavor thing, like that. Dreadnought here is cranking, so as Slayer at least, with Opportunist and Dreadnought and all of the Overpower buffs, like Overpower is doing a ton of your damage. It's very evenly split, actually, between Overpower, double dipping with Dreadnought, Mortal Strike, and Execute. So Slayer feels pretty nice. Not too many complaints about it. Now, that being said, jumping over to Colossus, on the other hand. Colossus, it's, where do I want to start? This is the single target build that I've been playing with it right now on beta. It plays basically identically to Slayer, except it just feels worse in every way. I'm sorry to say, because it's very rage-starved and very slow. It's very clunky feeling, I would say. And Avatar has lost a lot of value as a DPS cooldown over the years, so you can drop this, and grab Brute Force to kind of prop up the rage economy some, so you get more Tactician procs. More Overpower is just a free spell. Interestingly, I don't have Ravager, because Ravager doesn't really have any synergy as Colossus anymore, or Slayer, either one, unless you're an AoE, where it's buffing Cleave and Whirlwind. But in pure single target, we don't have Unhinged anymore as Colossus. Slayer still has it, but you're not getting those free Mortal Strikes to ramp up stacks for your Colossal Might stacks, or whatever it's called, to buff your Demolish. So it just doesn't seem all that useful, doesn't do enough damage in and of itself, so I'd rather put the talents in something else. Avatar, like, if you're going to play Colossus, you want to hit big Demolish crits, right? So it just makes sense to lean into that, for me anyway, on the beta, getting that. And then we want to play into Battlelord, because Mortal Strike is doing the most, the majority of your damage as Colossus, as opposed to Execute. So not that big of a deal. But like I said, it's just really slow and clunky compared to Slayer. It falls way behind in damage for pure single targets, so yeah, it is what it is. And then moving over to the multi-target side of things, where, I would traditionally play Colossus and AoE, you pick up Ravager here, of course. Interestingly, Stance Mastery over Barbaric Training, like, this is going to be a math thing, but Whirlwind, or Barbaric Training, is only buffing Whirlwind. It's not actually buffing Cleave. And as Colossus, you're obviously taking Cleave because of all of the passives that buff it. So I feel like there's less, value in this talent as opposed to just the critical strike damage. That's why I've got that swapped. However, this is still buffing Heroic Strike and Slam, and Fervor of Battle will spend the Heroic Strike proc, so it's really fluid in AoE that you don't got to think about it so much. I like Fervor of Battle in AoE. Feels really nice. But overall, Colossus and AoE, also not playing with Avatar because we're not, leaning into Execute so much. So it's just more passive and bleed damage and cleave damage. But it does good damage, but it's still really rage-starved even in AoE. And I think the major culprit, other than not grabbing Blood Surge, you could drop some things and grab that, is probably this talent, Crushing Combo, because you really want to be pressing Cleave and Mortal Strike on cooldown at the moment in AoE, and it just rage starves you so fast that it doesn't feel great. It does good damage, and arguably still does more damage than Slayer in AoE. It just doesn't feel fun to play, unfortunately. So I've, got a gripe with that, I guess. And on the last but not least side, Slayer's Cleave spec, on the flip, feels great. It feels just like the single target version, if not better, actually. It's very fluid, you're rarely rage-starved, and the damage is very comparable, at least in consistent AoE, to Colossus. Obviously, you don't get the bigger burst windows with Demolish, but it makes up for it, in my opinion, that it just feels so much better to play at the moment. So yeah, I think Colossus definitely needs some adjustment with the rage economy, or jumbling a few of these talents around, maybe just getting rid of Crushing Combo and putting it back to the reset chance to have Cleave and Mortal Strike just have a chance to reset their cooldown, because as it is right now, it just feels super clunky. But anyway, that's overall my thoughts on things. Now let's jump into actually playing a few of these things. So we're going to start off with Slayer's single target build. And just jumping down here to some of these target dummies. All in all, it plays very similar to the Slayer single target build on live right now. So I'm going to keep this, pretty basic and not get into too much detail for the beta. But the gist of it is we still want to be spending Overpower procs because of Opportunist. Overpower itself is doing a ton of damage off of these two talents. And, this proc, as well as Execute stacking now with Sudden Death. You don't have to think about it so much. We don't have to track Juggernaut anymore. It's a passive thing built into Slayer now. Now, there is some nuance to that, but we're not going to worry about that today for beta. Basically, whenever you get an opportunity or an Overpower proc, you want to hit that. You want to hit your Sudden Death procs as they come up. As far as which one has priority, doesn't really matter. I'd say probably Execute at the moment. You still want to stack double Executioner's Precision in the Execute phase for Mortal Strike. So in practice, it's going to look like double Execute, an Overpower usually into Mortal Strike. And then the oddball of the mix is Heroic Strike whenever it procs. Right now, I would say just hit it as it procs, like as a first priority, because it's going to be per stack buffing your Mortal Strike. So even in Execute phase, you're getting the benefit of that, and the Armor Pen affecting everything. And then as far as cooldowns go, Avatar, Warbreaker, and Bladestorm, or Colossus Smash, I suppose. It's just now baked into. Very similar things there. And then last but not least, Wrecking Throw, you can throw in as a free filler, although you won't have to use it very often as Slayer. So going in on the target dummy here, just ignoring the fact that it's in Execute phase, I'm going to open up with Rend, and then you're going to go into your Avatar cooldown window with Colossus Smash into Bladestorm. So Rend, we're going to wait the GCD, hit that into our Bladestorm. You can Stormbolt still during your Bladestorm window, and then I got a Sudden Death proc, so I'm going to use that into a Overpower proc, into our big Mortal Strike from Brutal Finish here. And now we've got a Heroic Strike proc, so I'm going to spend that. There's an Opportunist proc. We're going to hit that, next into Mortal Strike. Another proc, keep hitting that. And then we're passively getting these stacks of Mortal Strike. You can overall kind of ignore it. But during the Execute phase, if you had 3 of these and you got a Heroic Strike proc, maybe you would prioritize Mortal Strike over that. But that's nitpicking too much. Basically, as it is right now, it's very similar to how it is on live. Just, play the arms Slayer rotation as you would, and don't think so much about your sudden deaths. You can hit them as they come up, hit your Heroic Strike as it comes up, keep Rend applied, and just, work your way around. And since anger management is impacting Colossus Smash and Avatar now, you ideally want to line them up, if they're coming off cooldown at roughly the same time, but otherwise don't delay like Avatar for 30 seconds or something. You can just hit it. Yeah, that's pretty much it for that. Like I said, I'm not going to get too technical with it today. Colossus single, we have to wait a moment because Blade Storm's on cooldown. It's basically identical, just very slow. It's really suffering from two things, being that Ravager not generating rage and not giving you unhinged procs means that you're stacking up your Demolish buff really slow. So it feels really clunky to use, and it's a bit of a priority thing. Like, prior to this, you could get in Demolish basically in your first Colossus Smash window. Now, unless you get insanely lucky with crits on Mortal Strike, it's just not going to happen. So it's kind of a dilemma of whether or not you send Demolish at like half stacks at the tail end, or if you just hold it for an entire reset. Frankly, I don't know the answer to that yet, right now on beta. It's not that important, but I'd say you could probably just send it on cooldown as it is right now, on the pull. So it's going to look very similar. We're going to rend and then use our cooldowns. And I should have hit Mortal Strike there first, I guess, for at least one stack into our Demolish. And then it's going to look very similar to Slayer, except we don't have Opportunist procs, but I'm still going to be using the resets just to prop up the rage economy as Colossus, because you will run out of rage very quickly as Colossus, and then using sudden deaths, just as a free filler as well. And as you can see already, you're hitting globals where you're already getting rage starved. And this is where having Wrecking Throw can really help and prop things up a little bit, just as a free, ability every 45 seconds. Obviously, it's not impacting anger management in any way, but it is what it is. Colossus, or Demolish itself, feels alright. I don't think it hits hard enough, actually, as it is. Mortal Strike hits really hard as Colossus, so like you can get some really big satisfying hits. It's just really slow to play. Moving over to the multi-target side of things. What's on cooldown here? Oh, Avatar. So, not actually playing with Avatar as Colossus. Maybe I should. You could swap some stuff to get it. It's just you're not leaning into the execute rotation so much. It's more cleave and Mortal Strike, so I didn't grab it here. But at the AoE side of things, target priority or rotational priority is we're going to get up Rend, because we've got this buff now from our old tier set that's going to be, buffing that in deep wounds. So definitely want to keep bleeds applied as much as possible, like in the past. And then I've got a trinket that I'm going to hit. Even though Avatar's on my bar and then my racial, I'm going to hit these before anything, of course, as a cooldown, but I don't have Avatar. So you're basically just going to rend everything into Colossus Smash, which is going to give us free sweeping strikes. Speaking of which, this Broad Strokes talent is nice, but it feels kind of clunky to use because sweeping strikes itself doesn't add to it. You're just wasting it if you hit them both together. So we have it, but we're just saving a global essentially, and then we can fill in later with normal sweeping strikes. But we're going to go in, rend, Colossus Smash into... We want to be cleaving on cooldown because of this talent, and the damage, of course. That's going to give us stacks, and then we're going to want a Mortal Strike on cooldown so we can get more stacks to Demolish, hopefully in that window. And then you're going to fill out with Overpower and the Dreadnought lines. And all that jazz. So, in Ravager as well, pretty much immediately after Colossus Smash to get the buff on cleave from it. So going in here, rend, hit some CDs, there's that, we're going to cleave, don't have rage, so we got to wait, or fill in with an overpower rather, use our sudden deaths. We got another proc there on Heroic Strike, which is going to be consumed by our cleave window, which is nice. So in AoE, we can get off that Demolish, really quickly like we used to be able to, so it doesn't feel so bad. It's just single target where it's really clunky. And as you can see, like, I'm having to weave in a lot more overpowers than I would like because we're just thoroughly rage-starved here. I can't hit anything in this situation in AoE. Like, the damage is there. It does good damage. It's just very awkward or slow. I feel like I'm going to end up cycle charging a ton. So if you didn't like that play style, that's probably going to be a thing again, even though they got rid of the talent that gives you extra rage. You're still going to want to do it just for rage, in AoE at least, for Colossus, or just Colossus in general. And then last but not least, Slayer's Cleave. So we're going to wait here just 30 seconds on Ravager. Like I said, in 5 targets at least, Colossus is probably still doing better damage in this, but Slayer is not very far behind and just feels a lot better to play. And on the added benefit, if you're running dungeons, the Slayer Cleave build is going to do way better damage in the single target boss fights of that. So it doesn't seem like it won't make up for it. I would rather play Slayer and AoE and single target right now rather than Colossus, because Colossus, the AoE build on a boss feels really bad, whereas it's not so bad in AoE. But anyway, the Slayer version of this, we're still prioritizing Cleave and Mortal Strike, but we have Execute now, and the Execute procs and Blade Storm, so it's going to prop that up. But we're still wanting to hit Cleave and MS on cooldown, basically, while weaving in the Overpower procs off of our Opportunist, because that's still doing a ton of damage with Dreadnought. But Mortal Strike itself is having a lot of priority with Cleave, because both of these things are still proccing Reap the Storm, and that's going to be a big part of our overall damage. And on top of that, our tier set, every time you hit Mortal Strike and Cleave on multi-target, you're extending Colossus Smash by 1 second. And what this ends up doing is, as long as you have, multiple targets to hit, your primary target at least, you can basically have 100% uptime on Colossus Smash. So if there's a boss with ads constantly spawning, this is going to be really good. So what this is going to look like on the target dummies here, we're going to go in, put up Rend. Speaking of which, it's a habit thing and it's a tuning thing, so I imagine you're going to want to do this in the long run. But as it is right now, Rend is doing very little damage. So, if you let it fall off over hitting other things in priority, I wouldn't feel too bad about it. But I'm going to try to, stay in practice, basically, that you want to keep Rend up as often as possible. But going into the rotation, we still have Broad Strokes. So we're going to go in, Rend up everything, hit Avatar, hit our Colossus Smash window, and then that's going to auto give us Sweeping Strikes. And from there, you could Cleave or Mortal Strike, but you might as well get the cooldown running, so I'm going to Blade Storm out of it. Typically, if I've got the Rage for it, maybe I'll throw in a Cleave actually on 5 targets just to get that better chance at Reap the Storm. But yeah, going in here, going to Rend up everything, hit our cooldown window, or throw up a Cleave there into our Blade Storm. We did get a proc, so that's a nice bit of damage. And then coming out of that, we're just going to hit Cleave into Mortal Strike and then use any Opportunist procs, and we want to keep Cleave on cooldown and Mortal Strike on cooldown. And then Execute Sudden Death is kind of like the last priority, just because it's going to be, continuously resetting our Blade Storm cooldown. I'm just prioritizing Cleave and Mortal Strike right now because it's going to extend the duration of our Colossus Smash in AoE by, such a degree that we can get basically 100% uptime on it if we watch here. And we don't want to overcap sudden deaths, of course. So if you get to, you do want to spend that just to get that rolling around. And like I said, we've got it going, and we're still getting unhinged procs extending. And yeah, if you play this perfectly, you can get it all the way around to 100% proc rate. And like I said, it just feels much more fluid. We're not having rage issues. So overall, I'm much preferring how Slayer plays on the beta as opposed to Colossus. Yeah, that pretty much sums up everything. I think I've rambled long enough. Guys, have any thoughts, questions, leave them down below. Thank you so much for watching. It's the holidays in the US, so I'll try to have more beta stuff coming up, as I can, but it's hard to get everything out in time. But anyway, thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.